Roar Nation, Promise Keepers is back. July 31st, 2020. Estimated 80,000 men will be gathering at the AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. Speakers are going to rock the house. It's going to be a full lineup, and on top of that, worship is going to be amazing. Why am I telling you so far in advance? Because tickets are on sale and they're slowly selling out. So, that being said, I hope I see you there. I am planning on going. Go to promisekeepers.org to get info and tickets. Again, go to promisekeepers.org. See you there.
Welcome to Are You Real? Finding the Authentic You, the podcast that focuses on Christians that are active in everyday life. Join in as we speak to everyone from successful business owners to educators to athletes about their faith and how it helps them reach out and revolutionize those around them to do the same. And now get ready to roar with your host, the voice of manifestation, John Fuller.
Hey, Roar Nation, your host, John Fuller here. I'm really excited about today. As you always know, I love talking about the topic of business or entrepreneurship. So that being said, I have brought on a fantastic guest, Jordan Raynor. Jordan, you ready to roar, my friend?
I'm ready to roar, man. Let's go, John.
Let's do this. Okay, so Roar Nation, check this out. He is the author of Master of One in the national bestseller, Call to Create. He leads a growing community of Christians seeking to more deeply connect to their faith with their work. In addition to his writing, Jordan serves as the executive chairman of his tech startup, Threshold 360, where he previously served as CEO after launching a string of successful ventures. He's a highly sought-after speaker. Again, that's why he's on our show. Topic of faith and work. Raynor has been he's been spoken at Harvard, SXSW, Q Ideas, and many other events around the world. He's been twice selected as Google Fellow, which I want to find out what that is. And he has served in the White House under the United States for George W. Bush. All right, dude, that's a pretty cool intro, man. You've done some stuff, but I got to ask you, I've never heard that. What is Google Fellow?
What's a Google Fellow?
Yes.
That's funny. Yeah. So Google had a fellowship program way back when. This is early in my career. When I was doing a lot of digital innovation for political campaigns. That's actually how I started my career, building software to help candidates raise money online. And Google had a fellowship program where you basically came in, got access to some of their tools and some of their learnings. And yeah, it was just their way of saying, hey, these people are doing really cool stuff with our tools. And it was a pretty informal thing, but it's a good bio line.
Yeah, but you got recognized.
That's exactly right.
So,
yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, so Google recognized you for making a dent.
I had a friend who was like, you realize like long term, that's going to be way cooler than working in the White House, right? I'm like, I don't know about that, but it's cool. Yeah.
Well, depending on people's political views, saying you work for Bush, it's going to, so actually there is some credibility in that statement that he said for sure.
Exactly.
So, okay. So Jordan, why don't you dive into a little bit, just kind of a 30,000 foot view of who you are and what you currently do?
Yeah, sure. So currently I serve as the executive chairman of a pretty well-financed tech startup called Threshold 360, where we're on a mission to allow anybody to virtually step inside of any location in the world. We've built the world's largest library of 360 media for hotels and restaurants and shops and attractions. So I served as CEO of the venture for 2.5 years, left about 9 months ago, and am now focused pretty much full-time on helping every Christian do their most exceptional work for the glory of God and the good of others. That's the mission of Jordan Raynor and company and my team that I have working with me. And so what that looks like is writing books and podcasts. We have our own podcast, helping Christians understand why their work is important, why their work has eternal significance, and how to get more focused and more masterful at whatever their craft is. And that's really the subject of this book that I'm launching right now, Master of One, the play on the old jack of all trades, master of none, which has definitely described me in the first half of my career, and really understanding, okay, how do we find that one thing that we want to choose to do masterfully well, not primarily for our own fame and fortune, but primarily because excellence loves our neighbor as ourselves. Excellence reveals the character of the exceptional God that we're called to glorify. So that's what I'm all about, man. That's me at a high level.
Come on, man. That's good. I like that you said I caught on your mission statement, obviously. So you kind of tagged your mission statement as helping. I thought that was really good. I don't know if other people caught on to that, but it's very clear as far as who you are, who you help, and your purpose inside your mission.
Yeah. Thanks.
So I like that. Okay. So why don't you dive in? I want to hear your story. So let's back up. How old are you right now?
I'm 33.
Okay, you're young, man. You're like, oh, my whole life I'm expecting you to say. At first, when I saw your video, I'm thinking, dude, he looks really good for being in his 40s, man, or something.
Most people assume I'm 47, so yeah.
Yeah, so, dude, you're way young. You haven't even started life, dude. Anyways, let's back up to the beginning about you kind of getting started into tech. So really, this would be the basis or the foundations of why you wrote the book. So take me there.
Yeah. So, the first part of my career, let's call it the first 5 years, I was the quintessential jack of all trades, master of none, right? So I had so many different professional interests. I entered at the White House when I was in college, and a little bit after, I made money playing piano in a wine bar. I was an entrepreneur. Early in my career, I had started and sold a couple of ventures. And so I was good. I think my story is very similar to a lot of your listeners probably, right? Like I was good at a lot of things. But there was nothing I could point to say I was like really exceptional at, like really world class at. And here's the thing, right? Like, and I talk about this in the book, Master of One. I don't have a problem being a jack of all trades, right? I think being a jack of all trades is the inevitable byproduct of discerning your calling and experimenting with a bunch of different things professionally, which I think is good, right? Agree. I do have a big problem being described as a master of none. And I really started to get convicted about this.
Yeah, that's painful.
That's painful, right? And for me, it's because, the essence of the Christian life, what we are called to as followers of Christ, is to glorify God and love our neighbors as ourselves. And we can't do that when we're doing mediocre work. We do that through our work when we do our work masterfully well and serve as really effective, imitators, image bearers of God's character of excellence, right? The opposite of mastery is mediocrity, and mediocrity, in my opinion, is a failure of love and a misrepresentation of our Father, right? So, over the years, I've been asking, okay, so what's the alternative to being a master of none? I believe the solution is embracing being a jack of all trades, but choosing one thing to go big on professionally, right? So in Master of One in the book, that's exactly what I do. I help readers find that thing, focus on that one thing, and pursue world-class mastery of the work God created them to do.
Okay, so that sounds great and all because you're down the road. You're at the tail end of it. You wrote the book. Okay, sure. So I'm just playing devil's advocate here. So I'm thinking of this. Okay, so for some of us, at the beginning of the show, I told you. So like just skimming through your book, I'm laughing because it resonates because I have multiple companies doing multiple things.
Yep.
And literally, like I told you, we're about to possibly start up a tech. A tech company. We own a construction company. My wife has a fitness business. Like we have all these things that none of them totally overlap, right? Mm-hmm. Good at all of them.
I would disagree with that.
Okay, which part?
That they don't overlap.
Okay.
And I'll explain why in a minute. But
I like that. Okay,
continue.
So keep it. So we're doing all these things, and the issue with that is I feel like, and I'm talking maybe my listeners too. So I'm trying to have this conversation as a listener. That like, again, I'm good at them, but not great. Mm-hmm. And then you're trying to find that overlap between where do I go all in? Like I think life is a poker game. Like it just works for me. I like to play poker. Yeah. I haven't played in a while, but like, where do I just throw all my cards in, all my chips? I'm like, hey, this is my last hand. I'm going all in.
Yeah. Yeah. So, this is really tough, right? Because most people cannot do many things well vocationally at the same time, right? I believe as Christians, we are called, 1 Corinthians 10:31, do all things for the glory of God. Glory of God, that's something that's such a buzzword of the church. What does it actually mean? John Piper says to glorify God is simply to reveal his character, right? And so I think we got to honestly look at everything we've committed to in our lives and say, are we revealing God's character of excellence? Obviously, we're not going to reveal perfection, right? But are we excellent in all things? There was a pastor down in South Florida who used to encourage his congregation to excellence in all things and all things for the glory of God. And so because of that, because I'm called to be an excellent father, and husband and church member. There's just by the reality of time and trade-offs, I can't be excellent at many things vocationally at the same time. I can't pursue mastery in many things vocationally at the same time. That said, coming back to what you said a couple minutes ago with all your various endeavors, I do think, and I spell this out in the book, and I think this is a helpful way to think about it, especially for entrepreneurs. A lot of people's one thing is going to be super specific, right? It's going to be a specific job. Like, for example, my mother-in-law has been the director of children's choral music at Idlewild Baptist Church for 30 years. That's her one vocational thing, uber specific. But most people's one thing is far broader than that, right? So this started, I started to understand this when I was talking to C.S. Lewis's stepson in an interview for the book. A guy named Douglas Gresham. And, I was asking Doug, I was like, hey, Jack, C.S. Lewis, he seemed to do a lot of things masterfully well, right? He was an excellent writer of fiction, nonfiction. He was an excellent teacher at Magdalen College. He was this great radio broadcaster. And Doug corrected me. He's like, no. Those were all one thing. It was just a very broad one thing. He very much saw his one thing as teaching. Everything he did, C.S. Lewis was a teacher, and he was very deliberate about cultivating that craft and applying it in different contexts. So for you, John, it sounds like your one thing is actually my one thing. My one thing is entrepreneurship. I'm very good at spotting gaps in the market, bringing products to meet those gaps in the market, and setting up systems to ensure that they thrive long term, right? Like, that's my skill set. And I apply that to tech startups. I also apply it to books. It's the same exact thing, right? I'm bringing products to market to meet needs, right? And so that's a broad one thing that I apply in a couple of different directions at a time. But even as I get older and older, I'm applying it with increasing levels of focus, right? So for example, I left the tech startup I was running as CEO, kind of the entrepreneur dream job, to focus even more narrowly on my one thing of creating content products, right? And bringing those products into the world. So that seems to resonate with the early readers of this book, this concept of a broad one thing, be it teaching or entrepreneurship or business. I think that's freeing for a lot of people.
Okay, that's good. So let's back up. I want to go back on your journey again. So back to kind of original question. Sure. So we're going to go back at least 15, maybe 18 years. So how you kind of got started, because a lot of our shows about purpose. So stepping into your purpose, which you're kind of on that journey, but take me back to the beginning, maybe in college, of like where you started, and you kind of like, hey, this is at least a direction where I feel called. And you started down that path.
Yeah, sure. So I was kind of a weird kid. I was a very weird kid, right? Like in the eighth grade, I was certain I knew what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. Okay. I was gonna be a Republican political operative. What eighth grader wants to do that? I have no idea. But that was it. I wanted to run campaigns. And first job I ever had, 17 years old. I was still in high school, ran a countywide campaign in my hometown of Tampa. We won. I was like, this is it. This is the thing. So I actually thought I had found my one thing very early on. But as I experimented more and more with it in college, and also tried a bunch of other things vocationally, I started to realize that my interests were varied, right? I liked business. I liked politics. I liked music. I liked a lot of different things. And so I just placed a ton of little bets in college, right? I played piano. I, worked for the Republican Party of Florida. I worked at the White House. I worked for some startups. And so that now I'm really starting to become a jack of all trades, right? Okay. So hold on. And I want to pick your mind though. So during that, are you a little confused? Like you're just very confused, incredibly confused. Okay. So somebody wrote me an email the other day, asked me about some help for business and maybe some coaching and stuff. And he's like, dude, I've just taken all these ideas and I've just thrown it on the wall, to see what's going to stick. So is that where you're at? Absolutely. And I think that's most people. And I think early in your career, I actually think that's healthy, right? I one of the things I talk about Master of One is you don't want to commit to your one thing too early, because in order to make the best choice, you need to experiment widely, right? And figure out what you're good at, what you're not good at, right? And so for me, I experimented a ton in college and then after college, right? So my first job out of school, I went to go, I was basically hired as the CEO of this political tech startup that the founder wasn't operating day to day, right? So I ran the business for, 18 months, grew it from nothing to like $500,000 of revenue with basically no cost structures, a beautiful business. But then I left, start my own company, sold that 18 months later. So lots of pivots, right? But along the way, started realizing, okay, entrepreneurship really is my one thing, right? Like that is the common thread. That is the thing that I want to get intentional.
Yeah, but for me, like to me, I hear that and I'm like, that's so broad. Like I have a hard time with that. So like, what is in your, I'm thinking of like a bowling lane right now. It's like what I'm picturing. So where are your boundaries in that? So cause you could have multiple businesses or you could be in the position. So how do you start navigating that?
That's a good question. And I think that's a pretty personal question for everybody to ask. For me, it was just very clear. Like early in my career, I would have multiple ventures at the same time. Okay. And that never worked, right? Like I got to a place pretty quickly where I realized it's what Andrew Carnegie used to say all the time. You got to put all your eggs in one basket. Like people would tell you not to put all your eggs in one basket are foolish. I'm telling you, as one of the richest men who ever lived, put all your eggs in one basket and watch that basket, right? And I came to believe that gradually over the course of my career. So for me, it always looked like doing less and less, focusing on one venture at a time whenever possible. And now I've gotten, the guardrails are super clear. The only avenue that I have today for my skills as an entrepreneur is Jordan Raynor and Company. It's launching books, launching other content products that helps the church do their most exceptional work for the glory of God and the good of others.
That's really good, man. I like it. Okay. So during your journey, I always talk about a story that I like that can't be worse than this. I don't know if you saw that. And the reason it's my favorite is because I think people relate so well to having that moment where you're like, I don't know, it could be in business and you're like, man, we're getting sued or we don't have enough money or God, if you don't show up, like everything's going to fall down. I need you to show up. Do you have one of those moments in your career where you're like, God, you got to intervene and kind of show me what to do?
Yeah. So, my second venture, which ended up having a relatively happy ending. We had a small little exit. But there was a moment where it looked like total devastation and failure, right? We were running out of money. I was working on the venture full time and we couldn't raise more capital. And so I had to figure out what was coming next for me professionally. And so that was a hard moment, right? Because now I started to question, what is my thing, right? Is it entrepreneurship? I thought it was, maybe it's not. But the real challenge. So
you were doubting yourself at this point.
I was seriously doubting myself.
Okay.
And the real challenge of that season of life was it really revealed to me that work had ultimate meaning in my life, right? So I talk a lot with my audience and on my podcast about kind of the spectrum of what we believe the meaning of work to be, right? So on the far left end of the spectrum, I think you find, frankly, my parents, a lot of baby boomers, right, who believe there's no meaning in work. Work is a meaningless means to an end. I go to work to get a paycheck to move on to the more meaningful things in life. And the Bible doesn't teach that, right? Work existed pre-fall, pre-sin. Work is worship, right? I fell and still am tempted to fall on the opposite end of the spectrum of expecting cosmic meaning from work, ultimate meaning, ultimate satisfaction and self-worth. And so when my venture started to fail, I didn't have a sense of self anymore, right? That was devastating. It was the only time in my life where I could say I was genuinely depressed. And what I learned from it, maybe somebody listening to this podcast episode right now is experiencing some level of failure, was failing to be transparent about that, ensured that it basically made me miss out on an opportunity to preach the gospel as the source of my ultimate hope to others and to myself, right? That was a big missed opportunity in that season of my career that I wish I could go back and redo.
Okay. Well, before we dive, I'm going to actually, you hit some sparks there that I'm going to mine out for a second. Before we do, I want to just give a quick moment for our sponsor. We're all about being real around here. And if I'm being truthful, I hate shopping for insurance. So recently, I found a company that made my life much easier and also helped me find an insurance policy, and they help you find all different types of insurances. So what was it? I'm glad you asked. PolicyGenius.com. So I went on Policy Genius, got a quote. It literally took just a couple of minutes, and I got to tell you, to be honest, I was extremely impressed with the representative that I had. They actually text me, followed up with phone calls. They made the process really easy, really impressive, and it all said and done, absolutely, I got insurance through them because they made the process easy, and I liked dealing with them. So that being said, why don't you go on there right now and compare and buy either life insurance, different types of insurance you're looking for. Get on PolicyGenius.com and see what they can do for you. I do recommend them and personally use them. Okay. So, Jordan, you made the comment, you said you found self-worth in work. And I never thought about this. I thought that was real good. You talked about baby boomers thinking that work is a means to an end. I've never had that thought. Mm-hmm. I've always thought that I feel like I've always been pretty balanced in the sense that, like, I knew I was created for a purpose and I wanted to live to the glory of that. But including myself, though, I have found in times past my worth in my work. Mm-hmm. And when it fails, like you said, when you're doing as an entrepreneur, you're like doing really well. You're making money. You're like, yes, I'm awesome. God, thank you. Everything's great. And then that can literally change in 5 minutes or 10. And then you suck and the world's falling to an end and you're terrible. How have you worked on that, or some of the things that the Lord has revealed to you to change that mindset? Because there is a balance in there.
So around this time, I binge read everything Timothy Keller has ever written.
He's a great author.
That changed my life. Right. And here's why, right? I think if you were to really boil down the theme of most of Keller's writing, it is this idea, this truth that if we build our lives, if we build our sense of self and sense of worth on anything other than Jesus Christ, so basically on anything that is changing and shifting, we will always be devastated, right? We will always ultimately have this inner turmoil. We'll always feel like we got to do something else to prove to the world that we're valuable and that we're not a chump, right? It's the oldest story in the book. It's the Tower of Babel, right?
Yeah.
But in Jesus Christ, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, he says that I am an adopted son of God through his work on the cross. And that is what gives my life meaning. That is what gives my life worth. I am worthy because the God of the universe sent his son to die for me so that I could be reconciled to him, right? So that's never changing. That's never going away. That's my sense of worth, right? That said, I do think the church can swing the pendulum too far in the opposite direction here and saying that work should not give your life meaning or identity, right? I hear a lot of people saying work shouldn't be your identity. And I slightly take issue with that. I slightly disagree.
I disagree. I'm with you on that one.
Work is who we are. Like we were designed
for something specific,
for some purpose, purpose that God has imprinted in our hearts. I think God gives us this desire to win and this desire for greatness. And I think that's good. And I think it's God honoring. I think where the line is when that becomes your sense of self, and when it becomes your sense of self-worth, that really should only be placed in the person of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay. I like that you said that, because I think that there is a lot of truth that you hear people do say that, especially in church or something, that, our identity is not our work. I agree with that, but there's a very fine line in the sense that, it's who I am is an overflow of how God made me.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I think that's where people misalign, that it's just naturally going to come out of me no matter what I thought it was interesting. You talked about like C.S. Lewis being a teacher. Yeah. It naturally came out of him. So whether that was for him writing or teaching or whatever, it just came out. And whatever we do in church or at work, one of the biggest lies that I hated for years, I heard this guy did me really dirty one time in business, and we went to church together. And his comment to me was, business is business, church is church.
Man, geez.
Oh, brother.
Talk about some bad theology.
I about came out of my skin. But when he said that, immediately I recognized there's nothing I can say at this point to argue the fact that he's ripping me off, because he had a deep-rooted theology of how he viewed God and how he viewed the world. And at that point, I realized that is such a lie, because church, business, family, my relationship with God, all of it overlaps. And if we don't recognize that, scripture says the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Yeah.
And that's where he was at. So
yeah, that's a dangerous place to be.
Yeah, very dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about flipping through your book right now. I want to talk a little bit about the path to mastery.
Yeah.
Phase 2. So why don't we dive a little bit into exploring?
Yeah, sure. So the book Master of One started with a question, right? Like, how do we do our most exceptional work for the glory of God and the good of others? Like, what is the path to true world-class mastery at anything, right? And so in the book, I outline kind of we did a ton of research, right? Ton of academic research, review of business literature, and I sat down with about 25 truly world-class people who are following Christ. Tony Dungy, coach of the NFL, NFL Hall of Fame coach of the Indianapolis Colts and Tampa Bay Buccaneers, C.S. Lewis's stepson. We talked to the Dallas Mavericks CEO, Cynthia Marshall, lots of impressive people. And, time and time again, there was basically a 4-step path to mastery. Step 1, explore, which I'll come back to in a second. Step 2 is choose. So once you've explored potential one things, making a commitment to master one of them. Step 3 is elimination. And step 4 is master, right? And that's basically perennial. You never stop mastering your one thing. But the exploration stage is really, really important. John, are you a fan of Essentialism by Greg McKeown?
I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, it's a great book. Go read that one instead of mine. It's really great. No, but in it, he basically says that like essentialists, right, which in the vernacular of my book are people who are focused on their one thing, ironically spend more time exploring more options before committing to their one thing, right? They take the time to sample a lot of different things before going big on one of them. And that's the advice I outlined in the book, right? And in the book, I outlined kind of these 5 principles of effective experimentation in your career so that you can place a bunch of little bets and figure out what you're good at. And then, and only then, once you've tested what you're gifted at, choose to go big on one of them.
Okay. So I'm just thinking out loud. And here's so I'm placing lots of bets. Let's say you're further down the road. Somebody's in their, mid 30s, 40s, and they're like, hey, maybe they're in my position. You got multiple things going on. You got lots of bets, but in some places you got bigger bets. You can't afford to lose. That's really an issue, because like for me, for instance, I can't bet too much more. Like my construction company is my main bet that provides us to do the podcast, life, kids, college, all that stuff. What if, but again, it goes back to, you said entrepreneurship as a whole, but what if you don't feel necessarily called for somebody? They're like, man, I like that one thing, but I feel like all these other little areas I would kind of want to get into. Mm-hmm. How do you juggle that?
My advice is beware of distracting side paths, right? Maybe you picked the wrong one thing, but not continue to do that one thing masterfully well if you're going to be dabbling constantly in other things. That said, right? Like you need to have range. You need to have a wide range of interests and hobbies, but like it's the Google 80-20 principle, right? Like spend 80% of your time on the business that's producing 80% of the results, right? Yep. Like, and if that's your construction business, great, double down there, make sure it's exceptional. Right. And maybe set up systems if you don't want that to be your one thing for every season of life. Set up systems to work yourself out of that business so you can have a different one thing in the next season of life. That's one thing we talk about in the book. Like you're choosing, I think a lot of people think of calling a vocation, or in the vernacular of my book, your one thing, as something that is inchangeable. You can never, ever change.
Point. Keep going on that.
That's not true at all. Yeah. Right. And I think it creates a lot of paralysis in people to not make a decision. And so they just float through life being mediocre at a bunch of different things. Sorry if I'm offending anybody who's listening to this podcast. Right. But you got to make a decision for what you're going to focus to master in this season of life, remembering that number one, there are very few irreversible decisions. Number two, there is no right or wrong decision. There's no Mr. Right for your career. There is a Mr. Best. And number three, if you care about doing your most masterful work for the glory of God and the good of others, I believe there's an imperative to make a decision, right? That's my opinion, right? But I believe there's an imperative to make a decision.
No, I think that's great advice. And I think it starts with what you said at the beginning of my question was being aware of distractions.
Yeah.
And then staying focused on one thing. And I like that you brought up the fact seasonal. I think a lot of people do say, well, there is paralysis when you think, oh my gosh, what am I called to do? Especially younger kids, college kids are like,
yes,
oh my gosh, I don't want to miss my calling in life. And I'm like, oh my gosh, dude, you're 20 years old. Go
just pick something.
Just
go do something.
Yeah. It doesn't even matter. Like if you're relatively interested in it, just go do it.
Yes.
If you don't like it, go find something else. It does not matter. Just work and pay your bills.
Yes.
So, okay, great advice. Beware of distractions. Focus on one thing. If you don't like it, go find something else. And
I would add some caveat to that.
Okay,
I would say, especially early in your career, right? Focus less on whether or not you like the work or enjoy the work short term, and focus more on whether or not there are signs that you could be really good at this thing, right? So I'm a millennial. I grew up, hearing my parents tell me all the time, follow your passions, do whatever makes you happy. It was probably the most common advice I heard about my career. But it turns out that's like awful advice, right? Put simply, it doesn't work, right? So millennials have had more opportunity to, quote, do whatever makes us happy vocationally. And yet we are less happy at work than any generation before us, right? And in the book, I cite a bunch of academic studies that show why. And here's why, right? The number one predictor as to whether or not somebody will describe their work as a calling as opposed to a job or a career is not whether or not they were passionate about the work before they started it. It's the number of years they spent getting good at that craft, right? Like passion is a side effect of mastery. You get to love what you do by getting really good at it. And you can't get really good at something unless you spend years and years and thousands of hours of purposeful practice developing it. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to, hate that you're going to hate your job for the first 5 years, right? There should be some inclination that, okay, I can really enjoy this. But like the deepest, like soul level satisfaction of vocation comes when you get really good at making others happy through your work. When you get really, really good at just administering the ministry of excellence to people and doing your work masterfully well, primarily in service of them rather than your own happiness. That's how you find both.
Okay, that's really good. So I'm a huge fan. I love Zig Ziglar. I have since I was a kid. He's always made the comment. He said, I'm hacking this and paraphrasing, but he basically says, if you'll serve enough people and give them what they want, initially you'll get what you want.
100%.
And I like what you said about that because it goes back to what you said at the beginning. If we'll go into it with the viewpoint of, hey, how can I serve people and learn something in this? I'm not necessarily in it for me right now, but how can I pick up a trade or learn something and just do my best at that, whether I like it or not, while I'm in this skill, glorifying God in it, because that's my foundation.
Yes.
And if I'm glorifying God, then ultimately I'm going to discover I like it, I don't like it. But at the same time, I'm giving God glory because I'm being really good at it. And you know what made me think of parable perfect is Joseph. You cannot tell me that Joseph liked serving Potiphar.
Right.
But God blessed, I was thinking about this the other day. Potiphar was a pagan, right? He's an Egyptian, doesn't know God. And God blessed his entire house, multiplied all of his possessions solely because Joseph rolled up on the scene and was doing an excellent job serving.
And because God was going to get the glory.
Yes.
Right. So one of the things I talk about in the book, like this, the fact that like follow your passions, do whatever makes you happy doesn't work shouldn't come as a surprise to Christians, right? Like, and listen, like I've been guilty of giving my own kids this advice, like slipping up because it's so ingrained in our culture. But here's the deal, right? Like we are called to model our lives after the one who came to not to serve, but not to be served, but to serve, right? Yeah. Follow your passions focuses exclusively on what value a job can bring you and make you happy, right? Like a much more effective and God-honoring strategy is to follow your gifts. Focus on the work you can do with excellence as a means of making others happy. And really, based on, and this is coming from academia, from non-Christians, it's the only predictable path to finding work that you will stay in love with, not just fall in love with, but stay in love with for a really long period of time.
Okay, so I want to give an example real quick for our audience. I was just thinking about this. So we went through a growth period in a phase in our company where we were growing really fast. We took up some contracts and it became really stressful because obviously there's more warranty work. We're having issues with structuring. We have too many jobs going. We're expanding fast. And I got really stressed out. I was getting frustrated. And I came to a point, I hated my job. I hated work. I was just irritated. But all of it 100% was perspective. And where I changed my perspective is I thought, God, you've given me an opportunity to be in people's homes. I want to bless them. So every Monday morning, we have our weekly business meeting. And our prayer is, God, I'm asking for good customers that we can be both a blessing to, and that also bless us, that there's this mutual overlap. That when we go into their house, we're bringing beauty to their homes.
Yeah.
And when I changed my perspective of how I was entering people's lives and their stuff, it was no longer I'm frustrated about work or, we have this or we have that. My perspective changed. It really is all about perspective.
It's all about perspective. It's all about seeing how the eternal significance of our work. I mean, this is every week we have a conversation about this on my podcast, from entrepreneurs to authors to, computer programmers. Like, how does our work beyond leading to opportunities to share the gospel? Yes, that's important. But I think we in the church think that's the only eternal significance of our work. And that's not true, right? Like we are called to create for the kingdom, to build for the kingdom of heaven. And we do that by creating these thin places, right? As signposts to the kingdom. When we create beauty, right? When we restore a home, when we build something beautiful, we're pointing to something eternal. Now, I don't know if that home's going to last into eternity on the new heavens and the new earth, right? But it's pointing to something better. It's pointing to something that is possible and stirring this longing in all of us for something that is good, right? And that deep down, we know that good thing is new heavens, new earth, and us living with King Jesus here. But there's so many dimensions to the eternal significance of work that you can unpack, and I would encourage your listeners to really mine the depths of Scripture and figure out how to apply that to their own work.
Okay. So let's go on to a little bit. We talked about exploring. For the sake of time, we're going to skip choosing because I kind of think that's
pretty simple.
That's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Eliminating.
Yeah.
So let's jump on eliminating.
Yeah, sure. So again, path to mastery, step 1, explore, step 2, choose, step 3, elimination, and step 4, mastery, right? So in the book, I basically make this case that once you've chosen your one thing vocationally, you got to be really diligent about eliminating everything else, or most everything else from your life that's vying for your attention. And now I'm talking about vocationally within the confines of work. So for me, I'll give a great example, right? So when I took over as CEO of Threshold 360, right, I had a very lucrative consulting practice, right? Threshold was a client of mine. Board recruited me to be CEO. I took over as CEO. It was very tempting to keep some of those clients at the consulting business that required very little of my time, but was very, very lucrative. But I had to fire those clients, right? Because I knew I could not be fully engaged in the work at Threshold as CEO if I was distracted even in the slightest, right, with those other things. So I had to say no to extra clients. I said no to serving on boards. My wife made the biggest sacrifice, saying no to her career. She had a very successful career in finance that she walked away from, knowing that I would be traveling away a lot more as CEO, raising capital. So there were a lot of things that we had to say no to. Now, that said, I'm not always good at this, right? Like there are things that come up frequently that I'm like, oh man, that would be really fun. I really want to do that. Like for example, we live in a coffee desert. Right, there's no good local coffee shop within a 5 mile radius.
Coffee desert.
5 mile radius of our house. And so every quarter, I'll come home and be like, Kara, we're going to start a coffee shop. Of course, we're not going to run it, but I know the guy. He's going to do a great job. We're going to be passive owners, sit back. And she always looks at me. She's like, Jordan, no entrepreneurial endeavor is small. And sure, this is a part of your broad one thing, but it's too much. You got to eliminate. You got to say no. So the lesson for me in elimination, right, is, number one, you got to get really clear on what you're saying yes to, right? Number two, once you've said yes, you got to ruthlessly eliminate anything that would distract you from that. But number three, long term, you have to have people in your life, be it a spouse, be it business partners, whoever, that know what your one thing is and will help keep you accountable to saying no to other things that are distracting you from the essential work the Father's given you to do.
That's really good advice, man. I had to write that down. Learning to say no, but really comes down to, I like what you said though, is finding your yes first.
Yeah. So, and by the way, I think, I think Jesus provides like the best case study of this, right? Okay. So, there's this beautiful scene in Mark chapter 1 that I think illustrates it well, right? So Mark opens up his gospel with this really productive day for Jesus. Jesus was at the synagogue. He drove out the demons from the man at the synagogue. Then he went to Peter's mother-in-law's house, healed her. Then everybody from the town came to Peter's mother-in-law's house, and Jesus healed them, right? And the next day, everyone goes back home. The next morning, Jesus is away by himself alone. The disciples find him. And they say, hey, Jesus, everyone's looking for you, right? They want an encore. They want more healing on day 2. And Jesus says in Mark 1:38, let us go somewhere else so I can preach there also. That is why I have come, right? So Jesus didn't come to earth just to heal and reveal his identity. His one thing, his essential mission was to preach the gospel in word and in deed. He knew what he was saying yes to. And that led him to say no a lot through the Gospels. You see Jesus saying no to things that are good things. Healing people was a good thing, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't the one thing. So if Jesus can't say yes to everything, neither can we.
Come on with that, dude. We'll drop the mic saying amen right there.
Hey, amen. There you go.
Okay. All right. So as we start to wrap up the show, what do you feel like, Jordan, one of your biggest strengths is?
One of my biggest strengths. One of my biggest strengths is discerning the essential from the non-essential. I actually think it's like the number one skill you have to have as an entrepreneur, especially somebody who's got lots of different ideas. Understanding what's important on a day-by-day basis, right? Yes, quarter by quarter, year by year, but I think it's a daily practice of sitting down and asking myself, what is the one thing that once accomplished is going to make everything else easier or just go away, make these problems go away? So I think that's a strength.
How do you navigate that? I'm just curious real quick. I've never asked somebody about that. So
sure.
How do you discern that, or what are some parameters that you use to say, hey, what's giving me the most bang for my buck today on this?
Yeah, sure. So first and foremost, you can't decide what's essential unless you have everything captured in a trusted system, right? So you can't be comfortable, not doing something unless you unless you could trust that you have inventory of everything you're not doing, kind of David Allen getting things done methodology. So I'm a big believer in that. But then once that's in place, I'm a big believer in that question that I just articulated. It's simple, but I think it's powerful. What is the thing that once completed is basically going to create the most leverage for the next thing, right? What's going to make everything else easier? What's going to make everything else or other problems go away? So for me as an entrepreneur, if there's ever an issue with my team, with my people, a personnel issue, some discontent amongst the team, or hiring a new position, that's almost always at the top of my list of most essential, because the right people make everything else in a venture easier, right? Yeah. If there's a problem with a customer or a really big customer that I need to land, right, that's going to help push us towards a big revenue goal, that tends to make its way to the top of the list. But I'm a big believer. Every afternoon, I examine all the projects that I've committed to moving the ball on in this calendar week, right? And I plan out my day, the day ahead, and I put the hardest, most important thing, most essential thing first 90-minute block of the day. That's what I'm going to get into.
That's great advice. And I'm glad the reason I was asking that, I've been reading Michael Hyatt's got a book right now on focus, and I've been kind of diving through that. So it's been really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you feel like your biggest weakness is?
Oh, so easy. Much easier than strength. I'm way too emotional. And I think as an entrepreneur, that's a pretty bad trait. I think entrepreneurs, I wear the highs really high and the lows really low. And that can be bad for making rational decisions in the midst of a really rapidly growing venture where the highs are wicked high and the lows are really low, right? That's why easily my biggest weakness.
Okay. Yeah. I think a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with that. That's always a joke within our groups, our business groups, and we talk about so. Okay. Jordan, last question. And if you could go back to the younger you, what age would you pick? What advice would you give yourself knowing you can't change anything moving forward?
I would go back to 21-year-old Jordan, graduating from Florida State University. And I would tell him that, and we talked about this a few minutes ago, Jordan, it's good that you want your work to provide happiness in your life, but the path to vocational happiness is getting world-class at something and making others happy first. When you do that, when you focus on the ministry of excellence and loving your neighbor well and glorifying God through doing excellent work, then you find that deep soul level satisfaction of vocation that's sustainable regardless of circumstances.
Man, you're the right guy for the generation of millennials coming up, man.
We'll see.
They need a whole lot of that. So, okay. So Jordan, where do we find you if we want you to speak, find your books, get involved with you, podcast, follow you, all the goods, man?
Sure. Everything's at jordanraynor.com. That's JORDANRAYNOR.com. And if you go buy Master of One there right now, before January 27th, you're actually going to be entered to win this pretty epic trip I'm giving away for 2 people to Europe. You're going to go on a 7-night European cruise. I'm going to fly to Barcelona to take you to dinner. And then you're going to go tour La Sagrada Familia, the world's largest church, designed by a true master of one, this guy named Antoni Gaudí, who designed these amazing attractions in Barcelona and then spent the last 12 years of his life focused on just one project, this unbelievable church that would quite literally, as 1 Peter 2:9 says, proclaim the excellencies of God. So if you go to jordanraynor.com, you can pre-order the book wherever you want or order the book wherever you want, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, but go to jordanraynor.com and you can enter the sweepstakes right there.
Come on. I'm going to do that. I'm just going to disclaim it right now, man. My wife and I are winning a trip to Europe.
Do it. Hey, I'll tell you what. Let's do this. Okay. So if one of your listeners wins, I'll pay for you and your wife to come too.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So listeners, I'm begging you right now, go buy some books. I got on there. If you buy like 5, I think, or 3.
Buy 3 books, you get 5 chances to win the trip.
Yes. So buy 3 and then give some away. And if we win, I will make sure you are paid back for your books. And we're all going to go to Europe together.
I love that. That's awesome. So let's all go.
Well, this is a family adventure, guys. We're a nation. We are in this to win it. So come on, baby. All right. All right, Jordan, hold on just a second as we wrap up the show.
Sure.
Roar Nation, I love you guys. Thank you so much. I hope this inspired you guys and got rid of some myths as far as direction, calling, things like that. And I just encourage you guys today, be praying as we go into the year 2020. Lord, what do you have for me? What direction do you have for me, my family, my marriage, if you're married? And especially at work, and get some clarity as far as what the Lord specifically has for you, because he did create you for a purpose, with a purpose, and on purpose. So I just encourage you to dive into that and see what he has for you. Love you guys. Please stay in touch. Jump on, send us a message. Casey and I are always here to help you guys. Remember, be real, be authentic, and be you. God bless.
That's all for this episode of Are You Real? Finding the Authentic You. Be sure to go to areyoureal.org for your free questionnaire to identify your gifts and talents and how you can use them to help people become leaders and catapult them into their destiny to help others become the leaders of tomorrow. We appreciate you spending your time with us and look forward to helping you reach out and revolutionize next time on Are You Real? Finding the Authentic You.